Next time, stupid ideas like this should never leave the corner of your room. Mason Adams laughed, pointing across the boardroom at Williams. The words cut deep like a dagger straight to Williams' heart. What Mason didn't know was that he'd soon regret every word he said. Have you ever been looked down on? Not because of your talent, but because of the way you look, speak, or the color of your skin? Stay with me, because what happens next shocks everyone in that room. Before we reveal the shocking twist, if you've ever been underestimated, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. This story is for you. William Carter had a ritual that separated him from everyone else at Green Life Pharmaceuticals. Every morning, before the fluorescent lights flickered on and the coffee machine started its mechanical gurgling, he would sit at his desk in the empty office and read letters, not emails. Letters, handwritten notes from patients who had been saved by the company's drugs. A mother in Ohio, whose daughter survived leukemia. An elderly veteran in Texas, who could finally manage his diabetes. A young woman in Michigan who beat hepatitis C against all odds. These letters weren't addressed to William specifically. They came to the company's general mailbox, generic thank yous that most employees never saw. But William had made friends with Doris in the mailroom, and she saved them for him. She understood that he needed them. 10 years. That's how long William had worked at Green Life Pharmaceuticals. 10 years of arriving early and leaving late. 10 years of perfect attendance, flawless reports, and quiet excellence. 10 years without a single promotion. 10 years without a salary increase. His colleagues didn't understand him. They chased bonuses and corner offices, angled for visibility, and played corporate politics like chess masters. They networked at happy hours and golf outings, laughed at the CEO's jokes a bit too loudly, and positioned themselves strategically in meetings. William did none of these things. He worked. "You're too nice, man," his desk neighbor Marcus would say. "You think they're gonna reward loyalty? Wake up. This is business." But Marcus didn't know what William knew. Marcus hadn't held his mother's hand while she gasped for air in a hospital bed, too far from the pharmacy that carried her medication. Marcus hadn't spent 3 desperate hours driving to find an open pharmacy that stocked the specific inhaler she needed. Marcus hadn't arrived 15 minutes too late. That was 7 years ago. The pain had dulled into something else, a purpose that burned quietly, steadily, like a candle that refused to go out. William wasn't at Green Life for money. He was there because medicine wasn't just chemistry and profit margins. It was the difference between a daughter having a mother and a daughter standing at a funeral. It was the difference between a tomorrow and a gravestone. Every pill manufactured, every drug distributed, every life saved. That was why William came to work. His co-workers saw a man too humble to demand what he deserved. What they didn't see was a man who had already received what he needed, the ability to be part of something that mattered. The office began filling with people. Keyboards clattered. Phones rang. The machinery of corporate life churned forward. William folded the latest letter, a grandmother thanking Green Life for giving her 3 more years with her grandchildren, and tucked it into his desk drawer with the others. Then he pulled out a folder he'd been working on for months. Inside were charts, data, and a proposal that could change everything. He had identified a critical flaw in Green Life's distribution model. Their newest drug, a breakthrough treatment for congestive heart failure, was only available at the company's flagship stores in major cities. Patients in rural areas, elderly patients without transportation, low-income families without the means to travel, they were all being left behind. William had spent 6 months refining a solution. It was elegant in its simplicity. Partner with local neighborhood pharmacies across the country. Create a mobile app that allowed patients, especially the elderly and physically challenged, to order medications for home delivery. The data supported it. The technology existed. The partnerships were achievable. All he needed was someone to listen. William had tried 3 times to schedule a private meeting with Mason Adams, the CEO. 3 times he'd been politely dismissed. "We'll circle back," Mason's assistant would say. "He's swamped right now." But William was patient. Good ideas didn't need to shout. They just needed the right moment. He closed the folder and returned to his daily work, running quality control reports and reviewing distribution efficiency metrics. Around him, the office hummed with the beautiful, ordinary rhythm of a company that saved lives. What William didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that his idea had already found a voice, just not his own. The conference room on the executive floor had windows that stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a view of the city that made everyone below look small and insignificant. Mason Adams loved this room. He loved the Italian leather chairs, the mahogany table polished to a mirror shine, and the way sunlight caught the crystal water glasses just right. Most of all, he loved the way board members leaned forward when he spoke. "Gentlemen, what I'm about to share with you will position Green Life as not just a pharmaceutical company, but a healthcare revolution," Mason said, clicking to the first slide of his presentation. The slide read, "Expanding Access Initiative." Proposed by Mason Adams, CEO. He'd been rehearsing this pitch for weeks, ever since he'd glanced at a memo that crossed his desk. Some mid-level employee's suggestion that had been routed through proper channels and promptly ignored. Mason had almost deleted it. Then he'd actually read it. It was brilliant. "Our newest cardiac drug is performing exceptionally," Mason continued, "but we're leaving money on the table. More importantly," he paused for effect, knowing the board responded to carefully performed empathy, "we're leaving patients behind." The board members nodded. Mason clicked to the next slide. "I propose we partner with independent pharmacies nationwide. Create a network that extends our reach to every community, not just major metropolitan areas." More nods. Mason could feel the room's energy shifting. "Additionally, we develop a user-friendly mobile application. Patients order from home. We deliver directly. The elderly don't need to arrange transportation. The disabled don't need to navigate crowded stores. We come to them." Richard Chen, the CFO, was already pulling out his calculator. "The logistics alone are manageable," Mason interrupted smoothly. "I've run preliminary numbers. The partnerships essentially create distribution infrastructure without the capital expense of building new facilities. The app development is a one-time cost, with minimal maintenance overhead. We're looking at a 40% increase in market penetration within 18 months. The room erupted in excited conversation. Mason fielded questions with practiced confidence, each answer pulled from the detailed memo he'd borrowed and memorized. By the end of the presentation, 3 board members were already discussing implementation timelines. "Mason, this could be transformative," said Patricia Winters, the company's largest institutional investor. "When can we begin the pilot program?" "I'll have my team start immediately," Mason replied, allowing himself a small, satisfied smile. Meanwhile, 4 floors below, William was being told once again that the CEO was too busy to meet. "Maybe send an email?" Mason's assistant suggested, barely looking up from her computer. William had sent 7 emails. None had been answered. "I'll try again next week," William said politely. He returned to his cubicle and opened the folder containing his proposal. He'd added a new section that morning, testimonials from patients who'd struggled to access the new cardiac medication. A woman in rural Pennsylvania who'd driven 2 hours each way. An elderly man in West Virginia who'd missed doses because the trip was too difficult. Each story was a small tragedy that didn't have to happen. William refined the executive summary, making sure every word counted. He checked the financial projections again, verified the partnership model, and reviewed the app development timeline. Everything was solid. Everything made sense. He just needed someone to listen. In his office, Mason was already drafting a company-wide memo about his innovative new initiative. He'd built a career on understanding one fundamental truth. In corporate America, it didn't matter who had the idea. It mattered who took credit for it. And Mason Adams had never been shy about taking what he needed. He scheduled a series of meetings with potential pharmacy partners, making sure to CC the entire executive team. He requested budget proposals for app development. He even drafted a press release about Green Life's CEO-led initiative to revolutionize pharmaceutical access. The idea was no longer William's. It was his now. William closed his proposal folder and placed it in his desk drawer, next to the letters from patients. He would try again to reach Mason. He would be patient. Good ideas, he believed, eventually found their way to the people who could make them happen. He had no idea that his idea had already arrived at the top, and that he was about to pay the price for its success. 3 months passed like a slow erosion. William kept trying. Mason kept stealing. It started with small things that William almost convinced himself he was imagining. A phrase he'd used in his proposal, healthcare access desert, appearing in an executive memo. The specific partnership model he'd outlined showing up in a presentation deck that someone left in the copy room. "Am I going crazy?" William asked Marcus one afternoon. "About what?" "I keep hearing pieces of my idea in executive conversations. Like echoes." Marcus barely looked up from his screen. "Dude, everyone has the same ideas in corporate. It's all groupthink anyway." But it wasn't groupthink. William had spent months researching, modeling, and projecting. His proposal was specific, detailed, and comprehensive. These weren't generic concepts floating around the zeitgeist. These were his words, his framework, his vision. He scheduled another meeting request with Mason. This time, he added urgent to the subject line. The response came from Mason's assistant. "The CEO appreciates your initiative, but is focused on several high-priority projects at this time. Please submit any proposals through the formal suggestion system." William had submitted through the formal suggestion system 4 times. Each submission had disappeared into the bureaucratic void, acknowledged but never addressed. He tried a different approach. He requested a meeting with Sandra Liu, the VP of Distribution. Sandra was known for being accessible, practical, and genuinely interested in operational improvements. The meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. on a Thursday. At 2:45 p.m., it was canceled. At 2:47 p.m., William received an email from HR requesting he complete a performance alignment workshop. Corporate speak for, "We're concerned about you." The workshop was led by a consultant who spoke in motivational platitudes and corporate jargon. 20 employees sat in a conference room while she explained the importance of staying in your lane and respecting organizational hierarchy. "Not everyone's ideas are appropriate for executive-level consideration," she said, making eye contact with William specifically. "We all play important roles, but we must trust that leadership has the bigger picture." William felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't random. This was targeted. Someone was actively blocking him. That someone was currently in the executive conference room, presenting his expanded pharmacy partnership proposal to the board. Mason had refined the idea beautifully. He'd added touches that made it seem more visionary: sustainability language, community impact metrics, diversity and inclusion components. He'd taken William's practical solution and wrapped it in the kind of corporate poetry that made board members feel good about quarterly earnings. "This isn't just business," Mason told the assembled executives. "This is legacy. When people remember Green Life Pharmaceuticals, they'll remember the company that put patients before profits." Patricia Winters was moved almost to tears. "Mason, this is why you're the right leader for this company. You see beyond the bottom line." Richard Chen was already approving the budget allocation. "I want a full implementation plan by end of quarter." Mason nodded gravely, accepting their praise with practiced humility. "I'm just grateful we have the resources to make this happen. Lives are going to be saved." Down in his cubicle, William was staring at his computer screen, reading an email that made his stomach turn. It was an internal announcement. Green Life Pharmaceuticals launches revolutionary patient access initiative. CEO Mason Adams leads charge to transform healthcare delivery. The email outlined the exact program William had proposed. Every detail matched. Every component aligned. His idea was being implemented. Without him, without credit, without even acknowledgement. Marcus rolled his chair over. Hey, check this out. Mason's doing that pharmacy partnership thing. That's like what you were talking about. Right? Exactly like it, William said quietly. Huh. Great minds think alike, I guess. William didn't respond. He was reading through the announcement again, cataloging every stolen piece of his work. The mobile app, the partnership framework, the delivery model, even the projected timeline matched his calculations. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't parallel thinking. This was theft, and there was nothing he could do about it. Or was there? William had spent his entire career being quiet, being patient, being respectful. He'd believed that good work spoke for itself. He'd trusted that merit would be recognized eventually. But what if he'd been wrong? What if silence wasn't virtue, it was just surrender? The next company-wide meeting was in 2 weeks. Mason always ended these meetings the same way. Any questions or suggestions from the team? It was pure formality. No one ever raised their hand. The question was rhetorical. A performance of accessible leadership that required no actual accessibility. But formality or not, it was still a question being asked in a public forum, and William decided, for the first time in his career, that he was going to answer it. The monthly all-hands meeting followed a script that never varied. Mason would open with company performance metrics, highlighting successes and minimizing challenges. Department heads would present updates. The finance team would show sanitized numbers that made everything look stable and promising. Then came the finale. Mason's favorite moment, when he would open the floor to questions with the kind of magnanimous smile that said he cared about employee input while his body language made it clear he'd already mentally checked out. Any questions or suggestions? Mason asked. Right on schedule. Silence filled the auditorium. 200 employees sat in uncomfortable chairs, thinking about their afternoon meetings and counting the minutes until they could leave. This was how it always went. This was how it always... A hand went up. At first, no one noticed. Then someone in the third row turned around. Then someone else. A ripple of confusion spread through the room as people realized someone had actually raised their hand. Mason squinted toward the back of the auditorium. Yes? Who's that? William stood up. His heart was hammering so hard, he thought people around him might hear it. His mouth was dry. His hands were trembling slightly, but he was standing. William Carter, quality control, he said, his voice somehow steady despite everything inside him screaming to sit down. I have a suggestion, sir. Mason's smile tightened imperceptibly. William, of course, please, share your thoughts. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward William. The room had gone from routine to riveting in seconds. People loved disruption, even small ones. This was the most interesting thing to happen at an all-hands in years. William took a breath. It's common knowledge that we recently launched a breakthrough cardiac medication. The drug is more effective than anything currently on the market. Mason nodded. Absolutely. Stellar work by our research team, but I've noticed we've limited our distribution to company-owned flagship stores in major cities, William continued. This creates significant access barriers for patients in rural areas, elderly patients without reliable transportation, and anyone living far from our major retail locations. A few heads around the room nodded. People were actually listening. William's confidence grew slightly. Instead of making patients come to us, what if we went to them? We could partner with independent pharmacies across the country, creating a distribution network that reaches every community. We could develop a mobile application that allows patients, especially the elderly and physically challenged, to order medications directly, with home delivery options. The room was silent. A few people in the front rows were nodding more enthusiastically now. Someone was already pulling out their phone, probably to look up whether such a program existed. William was about to continue when Mason cut him off. William. The CEO's voice had changed. The practiced warmth had evaporated, replaced by something cold and sharp. William, let me stop you right there. Mason stood up from his seat on the stage, walking toward the edge with the kind of predatory casualness that made everyone in the room tense. Did you really just suggest? Mason laughed. But there was no humor in it. That a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company hasn't thought about distribution? That we need a quality control analyst to explain basic market reach to us? A few uncomfortable chuckles rippled through the audience. The kind of laughter that happens when people aren't sure if they're supposed to laugh but are too afraid not to. William felt heat rising in his face. Sir, I'm not suggesting you haven't thought about it. I'm suggesting a specific implementation that could… No. Mason waved his hand dismissively. Let me tell you something really important, William. Something you clearly don't understand about how organizations work. The room had gone completely silent now. People were no longer looking at William with curiosity. They were looking at him with pity. You're in quality control. That means you check boxes and run reports. You're not in strategy. You're not in executive planning. You're certainly not in a position to waste everyone's time with half-baked ideas that sound like you read them in a freshman business textbook. Someone gasped. Marcus, sitting 3 rows ahead of William, was staring at his shoes. Mason wasn't done. These kinds of stupid suggestions shouldn't leave the corners of your room, William. And frankly, the fact that you felt entitled to waste 200 people's time with this nonsense shows a profound lack of judgment. William's hands were shaking now, not with fear, with anger, with the kind of rage that comes from watching someone steal your work and then mock you for having created it. Sir, with respect, this idea could save it. Mason's smile was vicious. See me in my office immediately after this meeting. And William, I suggest you think very carefully about whether you want to continue having a future at this company. The threat landed like a physical blow. William felt every eye in the room on him, some sympathetic, most grateful it wasn't them. All of them already crafting the story they'd tell about the guy who'd committed career suicide in front of everyone. Mason turned back to the podium. Anyone else have any questions? Real questions. Silence. Great. Meeting adjourned. Let's get back to work. The auditorium erupted in motion, people standing, grabbing bags, rushing toward the exits. No one made eye contact with William. Marcus gave him a quick, pitying glance before disappearing into the crowd. William stood alone in the back row, watching 200 colleagues pretend he didn't exist. He didn't go to Mason's office. He went home. The Copper still wasn't the kind of bar where people from Green Life Pharmaceuticals usually drank. It was too far from the corporate district, too worn around the edges, too lacking in craft cocktails and Edison bulbs and whatever else made a place Instagram-worthy. But that's exactly why William went there. He'd discovered it years ago, back when his mother was sick and he needed places where nobody knew him, nobody asked questions, and nobody cared what kind of car you drove or what title was printed on your business card. The Copper still treated everyone exactly the same, with benign indifference and reliable whiskey. William sat at the far end of the bar, his tie loosened, his jacket on the stool next to him. He'd already finished 2 drinks faster than he should have. The bartender, a woman named Rita who'd been pouring drinks here for 20 years, had wordlessly poured him a 3rd. The alcohol wasn't helping. The humiliation kept replaying in his head like a video stuck on loop. Mason's voice, the laughter, the 200 witnesses to his professional execution, and underneath it all, the burning knowledge that Mason had stolen his work, implemented his ideas, and then destroyed him for having suggested them. Bad day at work? William looked up. A man in his late 50s had taken the stool 2 seats over, close enough to talk, far enough to respect personal space. He wore an expensive watch, but a casual sweater. His face had the kind of lines that came from smiling more than frowning. There isn't ever a good day, William said, the alcohol loosening his tongue. Only days I don't work. Today's even worse than the others. The man nodded thoughtfully. He flagged Rita. Pour us another round. My friend and I are going to discuss the failures of modern corporate culture. Despite everything, William almost smiled. That's specific. Huh? Call it an educated guess. The man extended his hand. James, William. They shook hands. James had the kind of grip that suggested he'd worked with his hands at some point in his life, despite the expensive watch. So, James said, raising his fresh glass. What happened? William shouldn't have told him. He didn't know this man. He'd probably never see him again. But maybe that was exactly why the story came pouring out: the proposal, the meetings that never happened, the stolen ideas, the public humiliation, all of it. James listened without interrupting. When William finished, he was quiet for a moment. Tell me about the idea, James finally said. The actual proposal. So William did. He explained the distribution problem, the pharmacy partnerships, the mobile app, the delivery model. He talked about elderly patients driving hours for medication. He talked about his mother, who died because access was too difficult. He talked about saving lives, not because it was profitable, but because it was right. James listened to all of it. When William finished, he asked a single question. Where do you work? Green Life Pharmaceuticals. James nodded slowly, took a long sip of his drink, then smiled. I think we've had enough philosophy for one night. But William, that idea of yours, it's not stupid, not even close. Tell that to my CEO. Maybe someone will. They finished their drinks. James paid for both rounds, waved off William's protests, and shook his hand again. Take care of yourself, William. Bad days don't last forever. They've lasted 10 years so far. Then maybe you're due for a change. James left. William sat at the bar for another 20 minutes, feeling marginally better and significantly more drunk. Eventually, Rita called him a cab. On the ride home, William's phone buzzed. He was going to be fired. He knew it. Mason would use the public insubordination as justification. HR would have paperwork ready. Security would escort him out with a box of his belongings. 10 years of loyalty, ending in a conference room with fluorescent lights and carefully neutral corporate language. William closed his eyes and thought about his mother, about the letters from patients, about the idea that could have helped so many people. At least he'd tried. At least, at the very end, he'd stood up. That had to count for something. What William didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that James hadn't left the copper still and gone home. He'd gone to his car, pulled out his phone, and made 3 calls. The first was to his assistant. Angela, I need the complete organizational chart for Green Life Pharmaceuticals. Every employee, every department. I want it by morning. The second was to his lawyer. David, remember that audit we discussed for Green Life? Move it up. I want preliminary findings by end of week. The third was to Patricia Winters, the institutional investor he'd known for 20 years. Patricia, we need to talk about Mason Adams. Tomorrow. It's urgent. James Maxwell hadn't introduced himself fully to William. He'd just said his first name, because walking into a bar and announcing you were the company's largest private shareholder seemed like a good way to never have an honest conversation again. James had made his fortune in medical devices before pivoting to pharmaceutical investments. He'd bought into Green Life 15 years ago because he believed in the mission. Medicine that helped people, not just enriched shareholders. But lately, something had felt off. Profits were up, but expansion had stalled. Initiatives were announced but never implemented. Funds allocated for community outreach kept disappearing into administrative overhead. He'd been planning to investigate. Then, he'd walked into the copper still and met a man who'd handed him the missing piece. James spent the weekend reading everything he could find about William Carter. Employment record, flawless. Performance reviews, exceptional. Promotions, 0. Salary increases, none. 10 years of perfect work with 0 recognition. Then he looked at Mason Adams. Compensation had tripled in 5 years. Bonuses that would make Wall Street executives blush. And buried in the financial documents, something interesting. A pattern of declined expansion proposals that contradicted Mason's public statements about aggressive growth. Someone was sabotaging the company's community outreach, and James had a pretty good idea why. Monday morning, James sent an email to the board of directors. Emergency meeting required. Wednesday at 10 a.m. Attendance mandatory. I'll be presenting findings that require immediate board action. The email was vague enough to cause panic and specific enough to ensure no one would skip it. Mason received the email while in the middle of drafting the termination paperwork for William Carter. He stared at his screen, a small knot of anxiety forming in his stomach. Emergency board meetings were never good news. The email arrived at 7:47 a.m. on Monday morning. Subject line: Emergency all-staff meeting, Wednesday 10 a.m., mandatory attendance. By 8 a.m., the entire company was in speculation mode. I heard we're being acquired. No way, it's layoffs. Emergency meetings are always layoffs. Someone said the FDA is investigating something. Patricia Winters is coming. This is board level. William barely registered the rumors. He was sitting in the HR conference room, waiting for his termination meeting, when his phone buzzed with the notification. Emergency meeting. Major shareholder attending. He almost laughed. He'd be fired before the meeting even happened. Whatever corporate drama was unfolding, he wouldn't be there to see it. William? The HR director, a woman named Susan Chen, entered with a folder. But instead of sitting down, she paused. Actually, I need to reschedule this. Something's come up. Something? Just be at the Wednesday meeting, okay? She left before William could respond. He walked back to his cubicle in a daze. Marcus was already waiting. Dude, you're still here? Apparently. I thought for sure Mason would have. Marcus made a throat-cutting gesture. Yeah, me too. Wednesday morning arrived like an execution date. William almost didn't go. He'd spent Tuesday updating his resume and researching other pharmaceutical companies. Going to this meeting felt like volunteering for public humiliation part 2. But something made him go. Maybe masochism. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the faint, ridiculous hope that something might be different. He had to drop his son at school first, which made him late. By the time he arrived, the auditorium was already packed. He slipped in through the back door and froze. On the stage, sitting next to Mason and the board members, was James, the man from the bar. William's brain short-circuited. He stood in the doorway, unable to move, unable to process what he was seeing. James was wearing a suit now, looking every inch the executive, engaged in quiet conversation with Patricia Winters. James glanced toward the back of the room. His eyes met William's for a fraction of a second. Then he looked away, as if they'd never met. William stumbled to a seat in the last row, his heart pounding. What was happening? Who was James? Why was he here? Mason called the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming on short notice. We have a distinguished guest today. James Maxwell is our largest private shareholder and has been a valued partner in Green Life's success. James has requested time to address some strategic concerns. Mason's smile was tight. He looked like a man trying very hard to appear relaxed. James stood and walked to the podium with the easy confidence of someone who'd addressed rooms full of people 1,000 times before. Good morning. I appreciate everyone making time for this. I'm going to be direct because I respect your time and intelligence. The room was silent. People were leaning forward. I've spent the past few months reviewing Green Life's operational performance, financial allocation, and strategic initiatives. What I've found is concerning. Mason shifted in his seat. We've announced expansion plans that never materialize. We've allocated funds for community outreach that disappear into overhead. We've had innovative proposals that somehow never make it past initial review. Patricia Winters was nodding. Apparently, James had briefed her already. But today, I'm not here to talk about problems. I'm here to talk about solutions. And specifically, about people who have solutions. James paused. The room was absolutely silent. I'd like to invite someone to share an idea. An idea that should have been heard months ago. Mason's face had gone pale. "Mr. William Carter, would you please stand?" Every head in the room turned. William couldn't move. His legs had stopped working. His brain was screaming contradictory instructions. Marcus elbowed him. "Dude, stand up." Somehow, William stood. James smiled. "William, I believe you had a suggestion at the last all-hands meeting. Something about expanding pharmaceutical access. Would you mind sharing that with us again?" The room erupted in whispers. People were pulling out phones, looking up the last meeting's recording. The story of William's humiliation had spread through the company gossip chain. Everyone knew what had happened. Mason was gripping the arms of his chair so hard his knuckles were white. William's mouth was dry, but when he spoke, his voice was clear. "Yes, sir. I'd be happy to." William walked to the front of the auditorium like a man in a dream. Each step felt surreal. People were whispering, phones were out, and Mason looked like he might actually be sick. James stepped aside, gesturing to the podium. "Take your time." William gripped the edges of the podium and looked out at 200 faces, the same faces that had watched his humiliation 2 weeks ago. But something had shifted. They weren't looking at him with pity anymore. They were listening. "Our newest cardiac medication is a breakthrough," William began. "It's more effective than anything currently available. But effectiveness means nothing if patients can't access it." He clicked to pull up a slide. Someone had already loaded his original presentation onto the system. James had clearly done his homework. "Right now, we only distribute through company-owned stores in major metropolitan areas. But 60 million Americans live in rural communities. Another 40 million elderly Americans struggle with transportation. Our current model leaves them behind." William clicked to the next slide, showing a map of the United States with enormous gaps in coverage. "I propose a 3-part solution. First, we partner with independent pharmacies nationwide. We create a certification program. They meet our standards. We supply them with our medications. This expands our reach without the capital expense of building new facilities." Heads were nodding. Richard Chen, the CFO, was taking notes. "Second, we develop a mobile application. Patients order from home. We deliver directly. The app includes reminders for medication schedules, automatic refills, and direct communication with pharmacists for questions." More nodding. One of the board members was already typing on their laptop. "Third, we implement a sliding scale delivery fee structure, with free delivery for elderly patients, disabled patients, and anyone on government assistance programs." William paused, looking directly at Mason. "This isn't about profit maximization. This is about ensuring that life-saving medication reaches the people who need it most. My mother died because she couldn't access the medication she needed in time. I don't want anyone else's mother to face that same fate." The room was silent. Several people in the front rows were visibly moved. William clicked to his final slide. Projected outcomes. Implementation timeline is 12 months. Projected market penetration increase, 40%. Projected revenue increase, moderate in year 1, significant by year 3. Most importantly, projected lives saved, conservatively, 15,000 in the first year alone. He stepped back from the podium. "That's my suggestion." The room erupted in applause. Not polite corporate clapping, genuine, sustained applause. People were standing. Marcus was grinning. Even some of the executive team was clapping. Mason sat frozen, his face ashen. James returned to the podium. "Thank you, William. That was exceptional." He turned to the room. "This proposal has been on file for 7 months. William submitted it through proper channels multiple times. It was never reviewed." Patricia Winters leaned forward in her seat. "Why not?" "That's an excellent question," James said. "Mason, would you like to answer that?" Mason stood slowly. "There are many proposals submitted. We can't implement everything. This proposal was never even considered," James interrupted. In fact, William was actively blocked from presenting it. Multiple meeting requests denied. Submissions disappeared. And when he tried to share it publicly, he was threatened with termination. The room's energy shifted from celebration to shock. But here's what's even more interesting. James continued. 3 months ago, this exact initiative was announced as a new company program, proposed by you, Mason, presented to the board as your idea. Budget allocated, implementation timeline approved. Mason's face went from ashen to red. That's not the ideas were similar, but identical, Patricia said coldly. James sent me the comparison this morning. It's not similar, Mason. It's plagiarized. The room erupted in whispers. People were looking at Mason with open disgust. There's more, James said. I had our auditors review the expansion fund allocation. Over the past 18 months, $4.3 million designated for community outreach has been redirected to administrative overhead, specifically to executive compensation and bonuses. Richard Chen was already on his phone, likely calling legal. Mason, Patricia Winters said, standing. You're suspended effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. The board will convene to discuss termination and potential legal action. Mason tried to speak, but no words came out. 2 security officers appeared from the side doors. The room watched in stunned silence as the CEO who'd run Green Life for 5 years was walked out like a criminal. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like thunder. James turned back to the room. I apologize that it took this long to uncover what was happening, but I want to be clear about something. He looked directly at William. This company was built on a mission to save lives through innovative medicine. That mission was nearly destroyed by ego and greed. We're going to get back to what matters. He gestured to William. The board will convene this afternoon to discuss permanent leadership, but I can tell you right now who I'll be recommending. The vote was unanimous. By 5 p.m. that Wednesday, William Carter was named interim CEO of Green Life Pharmaceuticals. By Friday, after emergency board meetings and expedited approval processes, the interim was removed. William stood in the executive office, Mason's former office, and felt completely out of place. The leather furniture, the expensive art, the view that made the city look like a toy model below. This wasn't him. This wasn't who he was. But when he turned around and saw Doris from the mailroom, carrying a stack of patient letters with tears in her eyes, he understood. I saved these for you, she said. I thought you'd want them in here. William took the letters and placed them on the massive mahogany desk. They looked small and out of place among all the expensive trappings of executive power. Perfect. The first month was chaos. William had to learn everything: board relations, investor calls, regulatory compliance, media management. Patricia Winters became an invaluable mentor, teaching him the political realities of corporate leadership without losing himself in the process. You're going to have people tell you to change, she said during one of their weekly meetings. To be more aggressive, more cutthroat, more like Mason. Don't listen to them. But what if they're right? What if I'm too what? Too human? Too decent? Patricia smiled. William, this company doesn't need another MBA sociopath. It needs someone who remembers why we exist. William's first major act as CEO was approving his own proposal. The pharmacy partnership program launched within 6 weeks. The mobile app entered development. Delivery protocols were established. Within 3 months, the program was operational in 15 states. Within 6 months, it was nationwide. The results exceeded projections. Patient satisfaction scores hit record highs. Medication adherence improved dramatically. And the elderly woman in Pennsylvania, who'd been driving 2 hours each way, she could now get her medication delivered to her home for free. The financial analysts called it a moderate success with long-term potential. William called it 15,000 lives saved and counting. But the real test came 6 months into his tenure, at the quarterly board meeting where he had to present the program's financial impact. Richard Chen led with the numbers. Revenue from the expansion program is up 23%, slightly below projections. However, when we factor in the reduced delivery fees and free delivery for qualifying patients, profit margins are down 3.2%. The room went quiet. Several board members exchanged glances. The question, Richard continued, is whether we maintain the current delivery fee structure or implement the premium model we discussed. The premium model would generate an additional $8 million per quarter. It would also put medication delivery out of reach for exactly the patients the program was designed to serve. William had prepared for this moment. He'd rehearsed arguments about long-term brand loyalty and market positioning. He had data on customer lifetime value and competitive advantages. But when he stood to speak, he set aside his notes. "I understand the financial concerns," William began, "and I respect that we have a responsibility to shareholders. But I want to tell you about a letter I received last week." He pulled out a handwritten note on lined paper. "It's from a woman named Dorothy Henderson. She's 76 years old and lives in rural Montana. She wrote to thank us because she no longer has to choose between buying groceries and affording the copay for delivery of her heart medication." William looked around the room. "Dorothy isn't a number on our quarterly report. She's someone's mother. Someone's grandmother. She worked as a teacher for 40 years. She paid into Social Security. She did everything right, and she was being punished by a healthcare system that treated her zip code like a personal failing." He set down the letter. "I became CEO of this company because someone believed I remembered what this work is really about. Not quarterly earnings. Not profit margins. Lives." William met Patricia's eyes. She was smiling. "Green Life Pharmaceuticals exists because of people like Dorothy. Our drugs mean nothing if they can't reach the people who need them. Our profits mean nothing if they're built on the suffering of vulnerable patients. Our success means nothing if we've forgotten why we're supposed to succeed in the first place." He took a breath. "So here's what I'm proposing. We maintain the current fee structure. We accept the reduced profit margin as the actual cost of doing business ethically. And we report to our shareholders that we're not just making money, we're making a difference." The room was silent. Richard was tapping his pen against his notepad. One of the newer board members looked skeptical. Then Patricia spoke. "I move that we approve the CEO's recommendation." "Second," said another voice. The vote was 7-2 inches favor. William felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for as long as he could remember. The company-wide celebration happened the following week. Not in the sterile auditorium where William had been humiliated, but in the parking lot, with food trucks and live music and families invited. William's son ran around with other employees' kids, playing tag between the parked cars. Marcus manned the grill, appointing himself chief burger officer. Even Doris from the mailroom danced, her rhythm surprising everyone. William stood near the edge of the celebration, watching his colleagues laugh and relax in a way they never had under Mason's leadership. James Maxwell appeared beside him, holding 2 bottles of beer. He handed one to William. "You know, you never asked me how I knew," James said. "Knew what?" "That you were the right person. I met you for 15 minutes in a bar. I took an enormous gamble." William smiled. "And now you're stuck with me. Best decision I ever made." James clinked his bottle against William's. "You know what the difference is between you and Mason? I'm less likely to commit fraud." James laughed. "Well, yes. But more than that. Mason saw this company as a vehicle for his own success. You see it as a vehicle for other people's survival. That's not a small difference. That's everything." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the celebration. "I got another letter today," William said quietly, "from a man in West Virginia. He has COPD. He wrote that our delivery program means he doesn't have to choose between paying for gas to drive to the pharmacy and paying his electricity bill. You keep all the letters, don't you? Every single one. Doris says I'm going to need a bigger office." "Good," James said. "Never stop reading them. The day you stop reading those letters is the day you become Mason." William nodded. He understood. 6 months later, At the annual shareholder meeting, William gave a speech that would be quoted in business schools for years. There's a belief in corporate America that maximizing profit is not just a goal but a moral imperative. That shareholders deserve every possible return, regardless of the human cost. That business and ethics are separate domains that should never intersect. I'm here to tell you that belief is wrong. Green Life Pharmaceuticals is profitable. We're growing, we're innovative, and we're doing it while ensuring that a grandmother in Montana can afford her heart medication. These things are not in opposition. They are the same goal, approached honestly. If you're in the business of saving lives, then people's health must come before profit margins. Not because it's charitable, because it's the only way this business model actually works in the long term. We don't save lives to make money. We make money so we can save lives. And if we ever forget that order of operations, we've lost everything that made us worth building in the first place. The speech received standing ovation from half the room and nervous applause from the other half. Several institutional investors called for William's removal. Patricia Winters bought out their shares personally. Green Life's stock dipped for 2 quarters, then rebounded stronger than ever. Turns out, patients noticed when a company actually cared about them. They became loyal customers. They told their doctors. They left 5-star reviews. Ethics, it turned out, was also good marketing. William kept the letters. All of them. By the end of his first year as CEO, he had over 3,000 patient letters, filling filing cabinets in his office. His executive team thought he was sentimental. He thought he was staying sane. On the anniversary of his promotion, William went back to the copper still. Rita was still there, still pouring drinks with the same benign indifference that had made the place a sanctuary. "Haven't seen you in a while," she said, sliding him a whiskey without asking. "I've been busy. I heard. Saw you on the news. CEO, who actually gives a damn or something like that." William smiled. That was the headline? Should have been. He sipped his drink and thought about the last year. The chaos and learning curve. The board meetings and investor calls. The policy changes and program launches. And most importantly, the letters. Thousands of letters from people whose lives had been changed by having access to the medication they needed. His mother would have been proud. "You good?" Rita asked. "Yeah," William said. "I think I actually am." He finished his drink, left a generous tip, and walked out into the evening air. Tomorrow, he had a meeting with a small biotech company that had developed a promising treatment for a rare childhood cancer. They couldn't afford the clinical trials. Green Life could. William pulled out his phone and sent an email to the executive team. "New priority project. Meeting first thing tomorrow. This one's important." They were all important now. That was the point. 3 years later, during a routine company tour for new employees, a young woman named Sarah raised her hand during the Q&A session. "Mr. Carter, everyone knows the story of how you became CEO. But I have a question no one asks. How did you stay patient for 10 years? How did you not give up?" William was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his desk and pulled out a worn envelope, one of the first patient letters he'd ever received. "This is from a mother whose daughter survived leukemia because of a drug this company made. I read this letter on a morning when I felt invisible and unimportant. And I realized something." He held up the letter so everyone could see it. "The work mattered, even when I didn't get credit. The lives saved mattered, even when no one knew my name. I stayed because the mission was bigger than my ego. And that's the real lesson here, not that I became CEO, but that I would have kept showing up even if I hadn't." He put the letter back in his desk. "In the end, the most important thing isn't whether anyone notices you. It's whether you're doing work worth doing. Everything else is just noise." Sarah nodded, visibly moved. "One more thing," William added, smiling. "Never let anyone make you feel small for caring about people. The moment you stop caring is the moment you stop being useful." The tour ended. The new employees left inspired. William returned to his desk and opened his email. There was a new message with the subject line, "Thank you for saving my father's life." He clicked it open and began to read. Some things never got old. Sometimes the people ignored the longest are the ones who should have been listened to first.